Welcome to Sleepy Tales, where relaxing stories are told slowly and softly to help you gently fall asleep. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. For more peaceful tales, subscribe and hit the bell to stay updated. Now, get comfortable and drift off to tonight's bedtime story. There are stories meant to comfort, and then there are stories meant to warn, and The Red Shoes has always lived in the second category. A tale stitched from longing, beauty, punishment, and the strange power of desire when it grows too bright to ignore. In this retelling, the world of Karen's shining shoes becomes broader and deeper, a place where temptation moves like a quiet river beneath every choice, and where every step carries its own shadow. It is a story about wanting something so much that it begins to want you back, about the thin line between freedom and obsession, and about how even the loveliest dreams can become chains when worn too long. If you follow this journey to the end, you will find not just the fate of one girl, but the echo of every heart that has ever chased something glittering without seeing the cost beneath the shine. Karen's earliest memories lived in a world shaped by quiet corners, worn floors, and the soft weight of days that looked almost the same. She grew up in a small village where fields stretched out like open pages, and homes were simple and tired, carrying the marks of many seasons. Her mother did what she could with what little she had, and though love warmed their days, it could never completely soften the hardships that pressed in from every direction. Karen learned very young how to make herself small, how to accept the things that could not be changed, and how to find brightness in places where others saw only grey. She watched other children run freely with ribbons in their hair and boots that hardly showed their age, and she felt a quiet tug inside her chest, a quiet wish that she, too, might have something lovely to call her own. The feeling grew the day she saw a pair of finely made red shoes worn by a visiting girl from another town. They were bright like berries in summer, catching the sunlight in a way that made them look almost alive. The shoes did not belong to someone special or noble, but they still had a shimmer that made Karen's feet feel bare in comparison. She looked down at her own worn shoes, patched many times, faded from long use, and felt a longing she didn't know how to name. It wasn't envy, exactly. It was a simple desire for beauty, for something that would let her feel like she belonged in the world she watched from the edges. That night, her mother noticed the way Karen's eyes followed the memory of those shoes, even after hours had passed. She gently asked what was on her mind, and Karen described the red shoes, not with expectation, but with a kind of shy wonder. Her mother listened, and though she had nothing to spare, she carried that small wish with her. She thought about it while working, while mending, and while sorting through scraps of fabric left from older times. The idea settled in her heart like a quiet promise. Weeks later, her mother gave Karen a surprise. It was a pair of red shoes, handmade, simple, and uneven, but unmistakably red. The color came from bits of dyed cloth pieced together as carefully as her tired hands could manage. They were not perfect, but they were beautiful to Karen, in a way nothing else in her life had been. The shoes carried a warmth that came from the effort behind them, and Karen held them, as if they were treasures from a distant world. For the first time, she had something that felt like it belonged only to her. When she wore them, the shoes made her feel taller, lighter, and almost brighter. They were soft and fragile, not meant for long walks or rough ground, but she cherished every moment she spent in them. The other children noticed them too. Some admired them, surprised to see such color on a girl like Karen. Others whispered that they looked strange, too bright, too bold. But none of that mattered. The shoes made her feel seen in a way she had never felt before. Her steps became more confident, and her quiet heart brimmed with pride. The shoes became a symbol of something gentle but powerful inside her. They reminded her that beauty did not always come from wealth or status. Sometimes it came from effort, hope, and the courage to believe one deserved something lovely. But life has a way of changing quickly, and the shoes that brought her such joy did not escape the trials of her world. The roads were harsh, the weather was unpredictable, and every day carried its own weight. The red cloth began to fade, the seams loosened, the shape of the shoes softened until they no longer kept their form. Karen tried her best to care for them, but the shoes were made from little and could not endure as she wished. Yet even as they became worn, she held onto them tightly. Then the day came when Karen's mother fell ill. The illness arrived quietly, hidden beneath long hours and cold nights, and it grew faster than anyone could stop. Karen stayed by her side, caring for her as best she could. But the small home that had once held warmth now felt hollow and fragile. When her mother passed away, the world around Karen changed completely. The red shoes remained beside her, but they could no longer carry the same joy. They became instead a memory, a reminder of love, effort, and everything she had lost. After her mother's passing, Karen was left to wander between neighbors' homes. People offered her what they could: food, a corner to sleep in, a bit of kindness. But these small gestures could not fill the emptiness that had opened inside her. The village understood her sadness, but life in small places moves forward quickly, and there was only so much others could do. Karen learned to live quietly with her grief, and she kept the worn red shoes with her as a link to the person who had believed she deserved beauty. Time passed, and the child with the patched shoes became a lonely figure, walking the roads of the village. She grew thinner, quieter, older in spirit than her years. Yet even in this new life, she never let go of the memory of those first shoes. She often held them at night, remembering the warmth of her mother's hands and the way the shoes had once made her feel whole. The longing that had begun as a simple desire now lived deeper inside her, shaping the way she saw the world. The villagers eventually decided something had to be done, for Karen could not continue drifting from one doorstep to another. A wealthy elderly woman who lived in a large house on the far side of the village agreed to take her in. She had no children of her own and believed it a good and charitable act. When she saw Karen for the first time, she noticed the faded red shoes and gently took them away, thinking they were not suitable for a child under her care. She intended to replace them with something finer, something more fitting for a girl who would now be raised in comfort. but Karen felt a sudden emptiness when the old woman removed the shoes from her life. It was not about the object itself. It was about everything the shoes represented. They were the last piece of her mother, the last reminder of the love that had shaped her early years. Losing them felt like letting go of the only warmth she still carried. Yet she was too quiet, too uncertain, and too tired to protest. She accepted the change silently and stepped into a new life without knowing what it would awaken inside her. As she entered the grand house, the world around her expanded. Rooms were wide, ceilings tall, and everything seemed polished and distant. The life before her was nothing like the small one she had lived with her mother. It should have felt like safety, like a blessing. But something inside her remained unsettled. She felt out of place, wrapped in comfort she had never asked for, and she found herself longing not for luxury, but for a piece of her old life, a piece held in the memory of red shoes. The red shoes, worn and faded, had been taken from her hands, but the longing they awakened did not fade. It rested quietly inside her, waiting. And though Karen did not yet understand it, that old longing would follow her into this new home, growing stronger as she tried to live the life that had been chosen for her. It would take shape again in ways she could not imagine, pulling her toward a future woven with shine, desire, and the restless beat of something she had once believed belonged only to her. And it was this quiet, growing longing that would lead her toward the next pair of red shoes. Shoes far more beautiful, far more powerful, and far more dangerous than the ones her mother had made with love. The wealthy woman who took Karen in lived in a house that felt like an entire world on its own. Its walls rose high, holding paintings, clocks, and polished wood that caught the light in a soft, golden way. Every object had weight and history, and every corner seemed to whisper that it had been chosen with care. Karen had never stepped inside a place so well cared for. There were no patched floors, no worn blankets, no quiet signs of struggle. The house felt as if it had never known hardship, and Karen walked through it like someone unsure if they were allowed to breathe too deeply. The wealthy woman herself was gentle but distant. She dressed in dark, heavy fabrics and moved with slow, careful steps. Her hair was a soft cloud of white, pinned neatly each morning, and her voice carried the habit of giving instructions rather than invitations. She did not mean to be cold, but she had lived alone for many years, and her kindness came in the form of structure. She believed that order brought safety, and safety brought goodness. For Karen, who had spent her life in a place shaped by love rather than rules, the structure felt both comforting and strange. Days in the new home followed a pattern. Karen woke early, dressed in clothes the woman provided, and ate meals served on smooth plates that never chipped. She learned how to move through the house quietly, how to sit properly, and how to fold her hands when listening. In time, she understood that the woman expected her to grow into a certain kind of child, polite, neat, grateful, and obedient. Karen tried her best, though she often felt as though she were wearing an invisible costume that didn't quite fit. The woman noticed Karen's efforts and approved of them. She believed she had rescued Karen from a life of poverty, and imagined she had given her everything a young girl could want. But she did not see the emptiness Karen carried with her. She did not see how much the girl missed the softness of her mother's love, or the simple comfort of having something that belonged only to her, made by hands that knew her heart. She did not understand that taking away the faded red shoes had left Karen feeling unanchored. In place of the handmade shoes, the wealthy woman provided sturdy black shoes, well-fitted and polished. They were practical, respectable, and exactly the kind of shoes a proper girl should wear. Karen tried to appreciate them, but they felt heavy on her feet. They did not glow with meaning. They did not carry love stitched into them. They did not belong to her story. When she wore them, she felt like she was trying to step into a life that had been chosen for her, rather than one she had chosen herself. Still, the woman cared for her. She provided lessons in reading, writing, and deportment. She hired a seamstress to make Karen new dresses, all in calm, muted colors. She ensured Karen had warm meals, clean rooms, and a bed soft enough to lull her into sleep each night. Karen knew she should feel grateful, and part of her did. But comfort can sometimes feel like a stranger when it replaces something familiar, even if that familiar thing was smaller and harder. Karen found herself drifting between appreciation and a quiet ache she could not set aside. One day, as the wealthy woman prepared for an important outing to the church, she decided it was time for Karen to have a pair of shoes that matched her new appearances. The black shoes were acceptable for daily use, but not for something as respectable as a church gathering. She believed that every girl should present herself properly, especially under the watchful eyes of others. So, she called for the shoemaker to bring his finest collection. Karen watched as boxes were opened in front of her. Pairs of shoes in brown, white, black, and soft gold. They all looked neat and clean, but none of them stirred anything inside her. She tried to focus on what she was supposed to feel, but every pair left her indifferent. Then the shoemaker opened a box containing a pair of red shoes. They were brighter than anything she had ever seen in her life, gleaming with a color that seemed to breathe with its own warmth. The leather was polished, smooth, and perfectly shaped. They were red in a way her mother's shoes had never been able to be, rich, deep, and alive. Something moved inside Karen, something old and familiar. The memory of her mother's handmade shoes rose to the surface, and with it came a longing that felt sharper than before. She reached out without thinking, drawn to the shine of the red. The wealthy woman frowned, thinking the shoes too bold, too flashy, too inappropriate for a young girl. But the shoemaker praised them so highly and insisted they suited Karen so well that the woman reluctantly agreed to purchase them. Karen could hardly focus on anything else. The shoes felt like a dream reborn, shimmering with a possibility she had not felt in years. When Karen tried them on, they fit as if they had been made for her alone. They hugged her feet with a gentle firmness, and she felt an unfamiliar thrill run through her. The shoes were more than beautiful. They were freeing. They awakened a spark inside her, the same spark she had felt as a child when her mother had made that first pair. This new spark was stronger, deeper, and mixed with something she could not name. It It was more than happiness. It was hunger. The wealthy woman noticed the way Karen lit up in the red shoes and felt a brief concern tighten her chest. She reminded the girl to stay modest and to behave properly. She believed beautiful things were fine, only when kept in control. She did not like the way Karen seemed to forget the world around her the moment the shoes touched her feet. But the decision had been made, and there was nothing left to do but accept that the shoes were now part of Karen's life. Karen wore the red shoes to church for the first time, and as she walked through the aisle, she felt the world shift. People turned to look, some admiring, some disapproving, some whispering among themselves. Karen was used to being unnoticed, moving quietly through life like a shadow. But in those shoes, she felt visible. She felt vivid. She felt like she existed in a way she never had before. The sensation was intoxicating. After that day, Karen found herself thinking about the red shoes constantly. When she wasn't wearing them, she imagined the way they shone in sunlight. When she put them on, she felt a shiver of delight, as though the shoes carried a magic she could almost feel humming through her. She began to crave that feeling, to want it more than she had ever wanted anything. The shoes, once an accessory, started becoming the center of her thoughts. The wealthy woman noticed her growing attachment and tried to limit how often Karen wore them. She insisted they were only for special occasions, not for daily use. But limits only deepened Karen's longing. The shoes felt like the first thing that truly belonged to her in this new life, and she clung to them with an intensity that surprised even herself. What Karen did not yet understand was that longing, once awakened, does not always stay gentle. It grows, taking root in places deep within the heart. And sometimes, what begins as admiration slowly turns into something sharper, something that takes more than it gives. The red shoes, beautiful as they were, carried a strange pull that wrapped itself around her thoughts, tightening with each passing day. And though Karen did not know how powerful that pull would become, she would soon step into a path shaped entirely by the shine of those bright red shoes, a path that would lead her into places she could not yet imagine. As a quiet whisper inside her urged her forward into what awaited in the days to come. The red shoes began to change Karen's life in ways so small at first that she barely noticed them. They started as a source of joy, a burst of color in a world that often felt made of stillness and rules. But something subtle rested beneath that joy, like a thread pulling gently, steadily, weaving itself into her every step. When she placed the shoes on her feet, the world seemed to sharpen around her. Colors brightened, sounds softened, and a faint hum seemed to settle beneath her pulse. It felt as if the shoes carried a quiet life of their own, one she had not invited but welcomed without thinking. The wealthy woman kept the shoes stored in a small wooden box, set high on a shelf, and insisted they be worn only for church or important occasions. Karen obeyed, but each time she opened the box, she felt a small rush of warmth, as though the shoes recognized her. She would run her fingers over the smooth surface, feeling the shine like a secret promise. She began spending moments alone with them, polishing them, holding them, imagining the way they would gleam when she finally stepped outside again. The second time she wore them to church, the air felt different. Karen walked slowly at first, her steps light on the path leading into town. But with every movement, she felt an urge, soft but steady, to go faster. The shoes pressed against her feet in a gentle rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. She lengthened her stride without meaning to. Her breaths deepened. Something pulled her forward, not painfully, not forcefully, but undeniably. She walked ahead of the wealthy woman without noticing she had left her behind, and it was only when she reached the church doors that she realized how far she had gone. The woman approached moments later, slightly breathless and displeased. Karen apologized, but the apology felt distant, as though spoken by someone who had been only partly present. Inside the church, she tried to sit still, but her feet tingled. The shoes rested on the stone floor, shining faintly in the dim light, and Karen felt an itch beneath her skin to move, to turn, to sway. She resisted the urge, pressing her heels firmly to the ground, focusing on the somber tones around her. Still, the restlessness remained, a quiet whisper beneath the calm. The discomfort faded when she removed the shoes after service. Her feet suddenly felt heavy, as though stepping back into a world without the strange brightness they brought. The wealthy woman noticed nothing unusual, believing only that Karen had walked too quickly due to excitement. But Karen understood that something had shifted, even if she could not yet explain it. Days passed, and each time Karen looked at the shoebox, she felt a pull, as steady and certain as a tide. She waited for permission to wear them again, and in the quiet hours when the wealthy woman rested, Karen sometimes imagined slipping the shoes on and running through the house. She imagined spinning, gliding, letting her feet move without restraint. The fantasy felt warm and freeing, but she kept her promise to follow the woman's rules, though the longing inside her grew. The next occasion came during a village gathering. The wealthy woman dressed Karen in a pale dress and allowed her to wear the red shoes. As Karen stepped outside, the shoes gleamed under the sunlight, and the world around her seemed to open wider than before. She felt lighter, almost as if the shoes carried part of her weight. When the gathering began, she found herself drifting to the edges of the crowd, her steps slow and smooth, as though guided by an unseen rhythm. Music played from one corner of the village square. It was soft, simple music, meant for entertainment rather than dancing. Still, Karen's feet responded, as though the notes were a command. She swayed slightly, then stepped forward, then shifted again. Her movements were small but noticeable, and a few villagers watched her with confusion. The wealthy woman frowned and called her back sharply. Karen stopped, startled by the woman's voice, and took a step toward her. But even then, she felt the shoes hesitate, as if reluctant to change direction. It lasted only a second, but the moment left her breathless. She pulled her feet back under her control and returned to the wealthy woman, standing very still to avoid drawing attention. Yet inside her, something fluttered, a mixture of fear, thrill, and uncertainty. That night, Karen lay in bed thinking of the shoes. She tried to convince herself that she had simply been excited, that the shoes had made her feel special, and she had responded without thinking. She reminded herself that shoes were just shoes, objects with no will, no thoughts, no life. But a small, quiet part of her heart whispered otherwise. The first true warning came on an ordinary afternoon. The wealthy woman had gone to speak with a neighbor, leaving Karen to sit outside with a book. The air was warm, the sky bright, and Karen wore her simple black shoes. She read for a while, but her thoughts drifted to the red shoes locked away in the house. The longing grew until it felt like a weight across her chest. She told herself she would only look at them. She went inside, moved the box from the shelf, and opened the lid. The shine of the shoes caught the light instantly. They looked almost new, untouched by the dust of time. Karen hesitated, telling herself not to touch them, but her hand moved anyway. She lifted the shoes, holding them as though they were fragile, precious. Then, without truly deciding, she slipped them onto her feet. The change came instantly. Her heart leapt, her breath quickened. A wave of warmth spread from her toes up through her legs. She felt alive in a way she had never felt before. She took one step, then another, then another. At first, she simply walked through the house, admiring the way the shoes glimmered with each movement. But soon she walked faster, almost gliding across the floor. Her steps carried her into the hall, down the stairs, and toward the open door. She didn't remember deciding to go outside. The sunlight hit the shoes, and they sparkled, drawing her forward with a soft hum beneath her skin. She walked into the yard, her feet moving with a rhythm she did not control. She tried to slow down, but the shoes pressed forward. She tried to turn back, but the shoes guided her onward. Her heart raced, half in fear, half in exhilaration. She finally stopped by gripping the edge of a stone wall, anchoring herself until her breathing calmed. At last, she managed to pull the shoes off. The moment they left her feet, the restless energy vanished, replaced by a heavy silence. She stared at them, trembling slightly, unsure of what she had just experienced. When the wealthy woman returned, Karen said nothing. She hid the shoes in their box and placed them back on the shelf, her hands shaking. From that day on, the shoes' influence grew stronger. When Karen wore them, her feet felt guided by something she could neither understand nor resist. When she didn't wear them, she felt a longing that pulled at her thoughts like an invisible thread. She told herself she was imagining it, that she needed only to be disciplined. But deep down, she knew the shoes held something more powerful than simple beauty. Karen did not yet know that the enchantment had started long before she realized it, weaving itself into her choices, her thoughts, and her dreams. She did not yet know that the first warning was not an ending, but only the beginning of a path that would soon open beneath her feet, one that would pull her further and further from the safe world she had known, and deeper into the strange, unstoppable movement that waited in the days ahead. The day the shoes took full control began like any other, with no sign of the storm waiting beneath the quiet sky. Karen had grown accustomed to the strange pull of the red shoes, but she still believed she held some part of her own will. She believed she could resist them when needed, that she could balance longing with caution. But desire, once it deepens enough, often stops asking for permission. It beats its own path through the mind and body, and Karen soon found that her own wants were no longer separate from the restless hunger that lived inside the shoes. The wealthy woman planned a visit to the church that morning. Karen dressed carefully, expecting to wear the simple shoes she used on ordinary days. But when she opened the wardrobe, the red shoes seemed to shine through the dimness, brighter than she remembered, as though calling to her. The light around them seemed to warm the air, stirring something deep within her. She tried to ignore them, reaching for the plain pair instead, but her fingers trembled. Her heartbeat quickened. A familiar longing spread through her chest. She told herself she had enough strength to resist, but her hands betrayed her. Before she realized it, the red shoes were in her palms. And with one slow, fateful breath, she placed them on her feet. The moment the shoes touched the ground, her feet shifted forward. She tried to stop herself, but the shoes lifted her steps into a gentle sway. She tried to call for the wealthy woman, but her voice caught in her throat. The shoes guided her out the door, down the path, and into the street. Her movements felt natural and wrong at the same time, as if her body had learned a dance she did not remember practicing. At first, it was a soft, graceful rhythm. Her feet swayed from side to side, carrying her forward as if part of a calm performance. But the calm did not last. The movements grew quicker, sharper. The rhythm tightened. Her feet tapped the ground faster than she meant them to. Her breaths grew short. When she tried to stop, her legs only moved faster, spinning her in a wide, sweeping arc. The wealthy woman called after her, startled and confused. But Karen could not turn around. She danced down the road, the gravel crunching beneath her, each step marking the beginning of something she could no longer control. Past houses, past trees, past the familiar shapes of the village, her feet carried her without pause. When she reached the church, she meant to step inside, to sit, to breathe. But the shoes spun her in circles at the doorway, and then pulled her away again, as though the building rejected her presence. She reached for the walls, for a railing, for anything to ground herself. But her hands passed empty air as her feet dragged her onward. The sky began to change as the day slipped toward evening. Clouds rolled overhead, carrying the heavy colors of dusk. The light dimmed, but still she danced. She danced across fields, her steps stamping patterns into the grass. She danced along riverbanks, the water reflecting her frantic movements in trembling shapes. The wind tugged at her dress, at her hair, yet her feet never slowed. Hours passed. Her muscles burned, her lungs strained, and her throat grew dry. She whispered pleas into the empty air, but they dissolved into the wind. She tried again and again to pull the shoes off, bending down mid-step, clawing at the straps. But each time her hands slipped, and her body spun back into motion. The shoes held tight, as though fused with her skin. Night fell fully, bringing the deep cold with it. Stars scattered faintly across the sky, though she hardly noticed them. All she knew was movement, the endless rise and fall of her feet. She danced along the edges of forests, the shadows stretching tall as she passed. She danced through small clearings, her breath visible in the air, rising in white clouds before disappearing again. She danced even when tears blurred her sight, even when her legs trembled so violently she thought they would collapse beneath her. But collapse was impossible. The shoes would not allow it. Time began to blur. Hours melted into one another. The world around her shifted without her fully understanding how she had arrived anywhere. She passed through villages, fields, forests, and paths she had never seen before. Sometimes she stumbled into crowds, startling strangers who stared wide-eyed at the girl, who could not stop moving. But before they could reach her, the shoes spun her away again, lifting her steps beyond their grasp. Days slipped by this way. Karen no longer knew when one ended and another began. Hunger gnawed at her, sharp and constant. Thirst dried her mouth until her lips cracked. Her dress became dirty and torn, her hair tangled in the wind. Still, she danced. Through rain that soaked her to the bone, through sunshine that pressed heat against her skin, through cold that stung her fingertips and chilled her breath. Every landscape became a stage for her suffering. Yet within that suffering, something inside her shifted. At first, it was a hollow ache, a kind of despair that made her feel as though she were fading into the world around her. But as the dance continued, the ache sharpened. Her mind, forced into clarity by exhaustion, began to see the truth she had ignored. The desire that once felt warm and thrilling had become a weight, heavy and unyielding. The shoes had not created the longing. They had only fed the desire already growing inside her. And now, that desire had become something harsher than she ever imagined. A prison with no walls but her own will. With each painful step, she understood more. The beauty she had chased so eagerly, the admiration she had craved, the connection she believed the shoes gave her, all of it had twisted into chains. She had wanted the shoes because they made her feel alive, seen, extraordinary. But now she felt only the cost of that hunger. The shoes had become a mirror, showing her the shadow of her own desires, and she was forced to look without turning away. The dance carried her into changing seasons. She moved through warm winds and falling leaves. She crossed fields blanketed in frost, the ground hard beneath her feet. She danced through the silence of winter mornings, when the world felt still and brittle. Snow clung to the shoes, melting instantly from the heat of her movement. She danced beneath bare trees, the branches reaching down like thin fingers, brushing against her hair and shoulders. Her suffering shaped her into something quieter inside. The storm of her longing began to settle, replaced by a deep, aching clarity. She understood now that desire could burn brighter than reason, twisting choices until they no longer felt like choices at all. She understood that beauty could become a burden if chased too hard. She understood that a single want could grow roots so deep that it took hold of every part of a life. But even with clarity, the dance did not stop. Karen's body weakened, but the shoes danced her onward. Her steps became slower, more uneven, but the movement never ceased. The world around her shifted endlessly, a blur of landscapes passing beneath her feet. She felt the weight of time, the weight of choices, the weight of everything she could not change. Yet deep within her, beneath the exhaustion and pain, something stirred, a small seed of surrender, not of defeat, but of understanding. She realized that she could not break the curse through force or resistance. The shoes fed on the stubborn fight within her. Only by letting go of the longing that had fueled them could she loosen their hold. This realization did not save her instantly, but it opened a quiet path inside her, one that would grow in the days ahead. The dance continued, carrying her onward, but her heart had begun to shift. And with that shift came the first faint hint of the freedom she would someday reach, if she could find the strength to surrender fully and step into the stillness that waited beyond the endless dance. Karen had danced through nights and days that blurred into one another, her feet moving as though pulled by some unseen force. Exhaustion had carved deep lines into her body, yet even as her limbs trembled and her breath came in ragged bursts, a quiet thought began to grow in her mind. It was small at first, fragile, almost laughable in the face of everything she had endured. What if the shoes did not hold power over her because they were magical, but because she had given them power? What if the endless steps, the spinning and swaying, the exhaustion itself, existed only because her desire had never been measured, never been questioned? At first, she tried to push the thought away. Longing had been her companion for so long that imagining life without it felt impossible. The red shoes had been more than shoes. They had been hope, brilliance, attention, and love. At least the kind she believed she could take from the world. Yet now, standing, or rather spinning, on the edge of fields blanketed in snow, listening to the wind tug at her hair and skirt, Karen felt a flicker of understanding. The shoes had carried her desire outward, beyond control, beyond time, and beyond herself. And perhaps they had done this to show her what desire, unchecked, could become. The first steps towards surrender came slowly. She began to notice her own breath, the rhythm of her heart, the way the cold pressed against her skin. Each time the shoes urged her forward, she pressed her feet against the earth and whispered quietly to herself that she did not need to move, that she could let the shoes carry her no longer. At first, it was impossible. Her legs jerked in contradiction to her will, her feet spun, and her body resisted. But the more she repeated the intention, the more the rhythm began to slacken. The shoes glimmered still, bright as before, but they no longer pulled her same insistence. As Karen slowed, the world around her shifted. The colors of the field softened, no longer blurred by the motion of her spinning steps. The wind stilled its urgent tug, leaving a gentle whisper through the grass. Birds perched quietly, watching her without alarm. She breathed in deeply and realized that she had not felt the air fill her lungs with such richness for days, weeks, or perhaps months. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt the weight of stillness as something alive and comforting, rather than empty and oppressive. In the quiet, her mind began to trace the moments that had led her here. The first handmade shoes, the bright red pair that had reawakened longing, the slow pull of fascination, the unstoppable dance. Each memory revealed the same truth. Desire itself was not wrong, but her unwillingness to see its shape, to acknowledge the boundaries between want and need, had allowed it to grow into a chain. It had chained her body, her heart, her mind. The shoes were only the mirror of that desire, reflecting what she had carried inside all along. Karen knelt on the frozen grass, her hands pressed against the earth, her red shoes still shining, but resting quietly beneath her weight. She imagined letting them go entirely, setting them down without thought, without regret. She realized she did not need to wear them ever again to feel her worth, her beauty, or her place in the world. The longing that had given them power could be released, and with its release, the shoes would be powerless. Slowly, carefully, she removed them, setting them side by side on the ground. They gleamed in the sunlight, as brilliant and alive as ever, but they no longer pulled at her heart. And when she stepped away, it felt like a new kind of walking, one shaped by her own weight, her own will, and her own quiet strength. The steps were steady, deliberate, and for the first time, fully hers. With each movement, the exhaustion that had plagued her body began to lift. Her shoulders, once tense with the weight of the endless dance, eased. Her chest, once heavy, with a longing that refused release, grew light. The world itself seemed to expand, to open in ways she had never noticed, as if it had been waiting for her to step freely. The journey back to the wealthy woman's house was slow, but unhurried. Karen noticed details along the way that had been invisible in the rush of the endless dance. The delicate frost clinging to tree branches, the muted sound of the wind through tall grass, the small footprints of animals that had moved across the fields. Each sight reminded her that the world continued to move, quietly, in its own rhythms, without the urgent push of desire. It reminded her that life could exist in the balance between movement and stillness, between longing and acceptance. When she returned to the house, the wealthy woman was waiting, anxious and puzzled by her absence. Karen removed her coat and set the red shoes aside. She did not speak at first, for words seemed inadequate to describe the quiet transformation she had undergone. The wealthy woman approached, hands outstretched, but Karen only smiled softly and shook her head, indicating that the shoes no longer needed attention. The woman studied her with concern, but Karen's calm, measured presence carried a weight the woman could not challenge or undo. It was not rebellion. It was understanding, deep and quiet. Karen placed the shoes in a corner of the room, not as punishment, not as a warning, but as acknowledgement. They would remain there, a part of her story, but no longer a part of her life. She had learned to see beauty without letting it dictate her every movement. She had learned to desire without being consumed. She had learned, finally, that freedom was not the absence of want, but the choice to step lightly even when temptation called. Days turned into weeks, and the peace Karen had found deepened. She walked through the halls of the wealthy woman's house without haste, feeling the solidity of her own steps rather than the pull of something outside herself. She attended gatherings, observed church services, and moved through the village with calm awareness. The world did not lose its luster, nor did the memories of longing fade, but they no longer demanded her surrender. She had learned to carry them lightly, like soft fabrics that brush the skin without binding it. In time, Karen discovered a quiet joy that was different from the thrill of the red shoes. It was joy rooted in understanding rather than possession, in presence rather than distraction, in the gentle clarity that comes from embracing what is real and possible. She noticed the beauty of a simple meal, the warmth of a friend's conversation, the soft hush of evening as it fell over the village. These were the treasures of life that had always existed, unnoticed, beneath the glare of desire. The red shoes remained in their corner, gleaming faintly in sunlight that slipped through the windows. They were no longer a threat, for their power depended on the energy Karen had once given them. Without her longing, they were objects again, beautiful, yet silent. She could glance at them and remember what she had endured, what she had learned, without feeling fear or compulsion. They became a quiet testament to the transformation she had undergone, a symbol not of punishment but of understanding. Karen's life moved forward with a steady, soft rhythm. She cared for herself and for others, aware of the fragility and beauty in each moment. She had learned humility, not as defeat, but as awareness of her place in a vast world. She had learned acceptance, not as resignation, but as the strength to release what she could not control. And she had learned stillness, not as boredom, but as a space where clarity and freedom could grow. The red shoes, once instruments of obsession, now rested quietly, powerless without the longing they had once fed. Karen stepped into the days ahead with a calm heart, each step her own, each movement an affirmation of the freedom she had claimed. And in that freedom, she discovered a peace that no desire, no enchantment, and no longing could ever again take from her. For the first time in her life, Karen walked fully in her own presence, unbound by the brilliance of red shoes, unchained by longing, and entirely at home in herself. She had danced through suffering and emerged into understanding, and that understanding carried her further than any bright and shining desire ever could. The story of the red shoes ended not with pain or punishment, but with quiet triumph. The triumph of choice, awareness, and the deep, steady joy of living fully in one's own steps. Karen no longer needed them to feel alive. She had discovered something far stronger: the freedom to step softly, clearly, and entirely into her own life.